Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin today's webinar, Osteoporosis Canada acknowledges the land that our offices located in Toronto are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada. Welcome to everyone who is registered and who is watching via Zoom. And we want to thank our webinar partner, ThinkBeef.ca. This webinar will provide general information about cooking and food knowledge. It is not intended as individualized health and nutrition advice. If you have questions about nutrition, consult a physician or registered dietitian. Please note, if you have questions during the webinar, you can easily enter them in the Q&A icon. Just click that at the bottom of your screen and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the webinar within the time available. Nutrition is a key component for strengthening and maintaining healthy bones, as well as in the prevention and management of osteoporosis. Calcium, vitamin D, and protein are essential nutrients for proper bone health. At Osteoporosis Canada, we are working to provide strategies, new ideas, and recipes to help you get the bone-building nutrients needed to keep bones strong and healthy. Stock your pantry and freezer with foods that are a source of calcium and protein. Plan in advance and make a meal plan so that you can cook enough for future meals, which you can freeze and have access to at any time. Osteoporosis Canada recommends including protein daily at every meal to benefit muscle and bone health. Some examples are beef, eggs, fish, poultry, tofu, legumes, nuts, milk, yogurt, and cheese. Beef has many essential nutrients packed into each small serving and provides nutrients that are difficult to get from other foods like iron, zinc, and vitamin B12. Today's featured recipe is surf and turf rolled roast beef with horseradish herb sauce. There is 57 grams of protein and 175 milligrams of calcium per serving. Today's recipe also features shrimp. And did you know that 100 grams of shrimp has 22 grams of protein and 91 milligrams of calcium? You can find today's featured recipe along with others by visiting osteoporosis.ca/recipes. I will also put the recipe link in the chat. It's now my pleasure to welcome Emily Richards, a professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and she's the author and co-author of 10 cookbooks. Emily also writes and develops recipes for print and online publications that include everyday cooking and healthy eating. And she can be found on TV, radio, and webcasts just like this one. Please welcome Emily.
Have to always remember to unmute myself. That's the big one. Thanks, Tracie. Happy to be here today. And thanks everybody for joining us. I'm so excited to show you this delicious rolled roast beef. You know, oftentimes we think, what are we gonna do? Now we're gonna have some family over, we're gonna have some friends over. We want a little bit of a delicious meal. Actually, we want a lot of a delicious meal. And you might be stumped. Well, this is a recipe that should unstump you and excite you because it is a classic combination of seafood and beef together, classically known as surf and turf, but showcased a little bit differently. And that's what I love about it, that creativity and the fact that nutritionally, I don't know, I'm gonna say it again because I'm astounded by what Tracie said. There's 57 grams of protein per serving in this dish, which is fabulous. And the bonus that we're building our bones stronger with the calcium in there as well. And you'll see, Tracie, I loved your did you know because I didn't know, and I think that that's great. That shrimp does have the calcium in it, and I think here our unique use of the shrimp and the added bang of having calcium in it is fabulous.
Absolutely. And so just before we get started, it's always fun during holidays especially, we're going to do another giveaway where we're going to give away one of our aprons, our unbreakable aprons. So if you've registered, and you're watching the webinar, at the end of the webinar, if you're still on, we will also, I'll pick someone's name and you will get this apron, but you're also going to get, Emily has a new cookbook. Emily, go right ahead.
You're going to get a copy of Kitchen Simple. So again, need some ideas, and there's lots of great ideas, lots of protein, lots of calcium, and lots of these recipes.
Yay. All right, Emily, I'm going to let you get to it. Can't wait.
Perfect. So we are going to take the recipe step by step. You'll notice that I have my recipe out in front of me. Always key. I'm a big fan of getting all my mise en place ready, which means that I have everything in front of me in hopes that I didn't forget anything, but also to refer back to my recipe so that I know what I'm doing as I go along. So the first thing we're going to do, there's different components of this recipe. So we're going to do the shrimp, we're going to work on the roast, and there's also a delicious sauce to go with this. So it's kind of a full meal deal here. We're going to break it apart and work with it in steps so that it's easy to follow, which I always think is a great part of doing these types of webinars or virtual classes, because it is super handy. So we're going to start off with the shrimp, and we're going to add flavor to the shrimp right away. I am using large shrimp that have been peeled and deveined. Now, if you're going to have helpers in the kitchen, because I love having helpers, whether they're kids or adults, aunts, uncles, whoever's coming into the kitchen with you, it's always a good idea to double check their work. If you're the cook, I like to do that. So if they are peeling the shrimp for you, make sure the tails are off, because that's a big one here. We definitely want the tails off. So I'm just going to take a peek here, because I think, yep, see, I knew it. Those helpers of mine. Oh, we take the tail out. We don't want it in there. So I'm starting off with a little bit of butter. We're adding a little bit of richness with a touch of butter, and we're going to use that throughout in the sauce as well, which is really nice. So we're going to add our shrimp, and we're going to cook it just till it kind of gets that hint of pink in it. We don't want to overcook the shrimp. Any seafood typically is one of those ingredients that, you know, it cooks so quickly, we often overcook it. So here we really just want to get it just cooked and firm. So I'm going to add my garlic in here as well. Okay, the garlic doesn't really need that much time. If you want to add the garlic first, you definitely can. Only about 30 seconds to cook that garlic. But if you add it in with the shrimp, that's totally fine too, which is what I'm doing, just to kind of keep things moving. And I'm also going to take a peek and make sure all those tails are gone. They are. All right, now we're going to add a bit of seasoning here. And perhaps it's a seasoning that you've heard about. Maybe you haven't, but it's one of my favorites to use with seafood, and it's classic. It's called Old Bay seasoning. You usually find it in the spice aisle, or you can also find it in the seafood section of your grocery store. I don't want you to go searching for this if you cannot find it, because all you need to do is use a little bit of celery salt in place. And what that does, it just gives it a nice kind of rounded flavor to the shrimp itself. Okay, I'm just going to grab a measuring spoon. We only need half a teaspoon here. And if you are using the celery salt, you could just use the same amount. So I'm just going to measure out that half a teaspoon and get that into my skillet as well. Now, if you're wondering why we're starting with the shrimp, well, we have to let it cool a bit because it is part of the filling. Okay, so but you can see that my shrimp are curling up a little bit, another sign of them almost being ready. And one day, when all this technology comes to fruition further, you'll be able to smell this wonderful shrimp. I love this aroma together. That little bit of garlic and the Old Bay seasoning is fabulous. All right, that's it. It only takes about 3 to 4 minutes to cook these shrimp. So light pink color, they kind of start to curl up, and then we're gonna set this aside, okay? So I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna tuck it over here for the moment because I want that to cool. I'm not gonna drain anything. So if you get a little bit of residual liquid out of the shrimp, that's just the water coming out of the shrimp. Most of the shrimp that we get is already frozen. So do thaw it properly. In the refrigerator, you can put it on a sheet pan or a plate on the bottom of your refrigerator and let it thaw overnight, and then you can peel it and use it. It's just food safety, but also it will thaw properly so that there isn't too much water left in the shrimp when you go to cook it, okay? So what are we gonna do next? We're gonna work with our roast beef. So I'm going to bring it closer to me. I'm also gonna bring another cutting board here just so that I can keep my workspace nice and clear for everybody. This is our roast. We are using today an eye of round roast. It's about 2 pounds. And this is a kind of a classic roast you see in the grocery store. I often, when I'm in there, I see people kind of looking at it going, is that a beef tenderloin? What is that? And if you take a look at it, I'll lift it up a little bit like this. You can see how lean it is. So oftentimes it does actually get confused with beef tenderloin, but it's a little different because it's from a different cut of the beef. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that this is a very economical roast. We can roast it on its own. This is actually often what I do. I season it, very similar to how we're seasoning this roast today. And then I roast it and let it cool and then thinly slice it for roast beef sandwiches or hot beef sandwiches, or even just to chop up and incorporate into a salad. It has so much versatility to it. What we're gonna do is make it just a little bit fancier by butterflying it essentially and unrolling it. I like to use the term unroll it, and you'll see as I do that, what I mean by that. So I'm gonna transfer my roast here, and you can see there's not very much fat on the outside. The little bit of fat that is here, do leave on, because that's gonna add some nice pan juices as the roast is in the oven, okay? So I'm going to use my knife, and I'm gonna do this fairly slowly so that you can see what I'm doing. Because once you master this, and I'm not a master by any stretch of the imagination, but once you master this kind of unrolling, you can use this as a roast to stuff with anything. So if you have a favorite stuffing or mushrooms or anything like that, it really, really dresses up this roast nicely, okay? So I'm going to do my first cut lengthwise, all the way down, okay, just like that. And I'm gonna go on my tippy toes a little bit because I wanna make sure that I can see both ends here. And I wanna get it to about kind of the 1/2 inch mark. So if you can see, I have 2 sides there and in the center all the way across. So if you're following the recipe and looking at it in the written word, I basically say you're gonna kind of do the same cut on both sides, but unroll it. So this is what I mean. I'm gonna take my knife and start kind of close to the bottom here, and then just work my knife across. And hopefully you can see that as I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep it the same thickness. So it almost looks like I'm unrolling the roast, okay? Now don't worry if you get a little bit too close to the end, okay? Like here, I just had that little cut, but that's okay because I just moved my knife a bit more. There, okay? And you just wanna keep going so that you get about the same thickness all the way across, okay? Now, luckily, I have another side, so you get to see it happen all again. Now, because I'm right-handed, I find it easier just to turn the roast over and do that same process again, okay? So again, start about the same thickness, and then just let the knife kind of, having a nice sharp knife really helps this cutting go along. And this is what's gonna help create that lovely roll in our roast, okay? Just like that. Now, if you didn't get this perfect, which I certainly did not, I want to make sure that it's nice and even. So I'm actually going to use a meat mallet just to pound this out a little bit, okay? So I have a flat meat mallet. So oftentimes, if you have a meat mallet, it has kind of the prongs on one side and it's flat on the other. For this, I don't want you to use the prongs. I don't want you to create holes in it. I just want you to pound it out to flatten it a bit. And this is just to help ensure some even cooking. So I want to make sure that I get all the edges just like that. I'm going to turn it around, do the same thing. Okay, this is also a good point. If you have any frustrations, you can take them out. Perhaps you don't want to shovel snow today, for those of you that are dealing with snow. I know that's what's happening over here, but just think, you're going to put this in the oven and the house will smell amazing. All right, so that's pretty even. And you can see how I've increased that surface area really, really nicely so that I'm able to fit in all my stuffing. Okay, I'm just going to give my hands a wash here.
Emily, we have a
Yes.
question. We
Oh
actually
yeah, for
had
sure.
two. Somebody heard a dog barking. I said, well, that's Emily's dog that's barking. So, but
Well,
that's not that's not the real question. But so for people maybe who, so in terms of the cutting of the beet, butterflying it and then pounding it out. So if you have osteoporosis and you are concerned that some of those movements maybe are not good for you, or if you have another condition like arthritis, you can ask your butcher. Your butcher would be more than happy to, you could even, and I'm pretty sure you could take it if you're in the grocery store, go to the butcher counter and ask them to open the package and butterfly it for you and flatten it out so that you don't actually have to do that.
exactly. And that's a fabulous recommendation, and it is 100% true. You can totally do that. Reason being is that's actually something that I remember as a young kid going to the grocery store with my grandmother. She didn't want to do any of that. If she could pound scallopini, which was just to pound out her veal cutlets nice and thin, that was okay with her. But when it came to kind of dealing with larger roasts, she always asked the butcher to do that. Now, her piece of advice, and I think my piece of advice, make friends with a butcher. If you don't have one in the family, make friends with one, because they can do amazing things with beef roast, and it's just fabulous. It makes your life so much easier. But this is also a point where you don't have to rush through this. You can do the cuts nice and slowly. And this is only a 2-pound roast, so it's not too overwhelming. And you can go a little bit at a time, but definitely 100% ask the butcher, and you can tell them you want it butterflied so that it's open, because you're going to roll it. Okay. Now, as for the dog, Tracie, that was my dog. Yes. And I'm working at home. I'm in my virtual kitchen. No, this is my real kitchen. It's not a studio. So I have one dog that barks, and he always tends to bark when he smells good food. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, that's a great tip, because I think some people don't make certain things because they're worried like they can't do it, or it's maybe not a good idea for them to do certain things like pound out the beef. So make friends with your butcher. It's good to make friends with everyone, but make friends with your butcher. Okay, Emily, let's see.
And this surf and turf roast, you can kind of, this is, we're preparing it as the recipe's written, but I want you to kind of think outside the box a little bit. So I told you that you could roast this on its own with the same seasoning, which we're using. I'm going to sprinkle some of it on. We need a teaspoon of the Montreal steak spice. So this is kind of a classic steak seasoning. If you have a favorite rub that you like to use with your steak, you could totally use it here. It would be fabulous. And we're gonna season from the inside and out. So that's why I'm only using a teaspoon right now. But you could also roast this on its own with that steak spice, and then just do the shrimp exactly how we did it. And you can slice this thinly and serve it with the shrimp, and you have surf and turf, just a slightly different version of what we're making today. So you can kind of go beyond what the recipe is and think of this as an inspiration to create different things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just set this aside for a minute, okay, because I want to get my filling together. So I'm going to bring back the shrimp, and this is where we need a food processor. I love using appliances, especially when they make my job easier. If you don't want to use a food processor, you can simply just chop the shrimp fairly small, because it is a stuffing. I'm going to pop it in my food processor, okay? So it just needs the shrimp needed to cool just a bit. And you can see I'm adding all that buttery, garlicky goodness in there, okay? And I'm just gonna pulse this to break up the shrimp a little bit, that's all. So if you think of crab, for example, that texture of flaky crab, that's kind of what we're looking for. We wanna be able to bite into this and know that it's shrimp. So just a couple pulses. Usually doesn't take too much to break it up. No, that's good. And then we're going to add our other ingredients. So here now we're going to add a little bit more flavor and color. So I'm a big fan of red and green, not just because it's the holidays, but it's always a great color combination with food. So I'm going to add my parsley. This is just chopped flat leaf parsley, and that's going to add a little bit of color and flavor. You could change this up if you wanted to use a little bit of oregano, or even some basil would be lovely in here too, just to kind of change up the flavor a bit. Now here's one where you might disagree with me, but I think it's in your kitchen, my kitchen, we can break rules. We're actually going to add some grated Parmesan to our shrimp. So if we have any die-hard shrimp or seafood lovers, you may think, oh, how dare you add dairy with shrimp? You know why? Because it tastes absolutely delicious. And this is actually working for us in two ways. It's adding a ton of flavor that will flavor not only the shrimp, but also the beef. Because if you haven't had a Parmesan crusted roast yet, you have to because it's delicious. We'll do that another time, Tracie. But it will also help bind the shrimp together, okay? Doesn't that sound delicious?
It does, it does. And so, you know what, while you're pulsing that, somebody made a comment. It was a great comment. So again, if a food processor is too cumbersome for you, you could, you know, getting tools to help you in the kitchen so that you can continue cooking and making, you know, really good choices and delicious meals, getting those bone building nutrients, a mini chopper. So sometimes it's just looking for other ways to help you do the tasks that you need to get done. Or as Emily said, a good knife, a cutting board, and just some time. You just block out your time to do the chopping. If, oh, look, Emily's got it. She's got all the toys, all the tools.
So the only reason why I have this is because my mother uses this at home, and my mom comes and helps me sometimes. And she said, you don't have a mini chopper. How am I supposed to do this? So she bought one for me, and it's fabulous. So it's super helpful for exactly what you're saying, Tracie. So
yes,
it doesn't take up a lot of space, and it helps in garlic, onions, peppers, anything like that. That if you're feeling any pain in your wrists or your hands, you just, again, pulse it up in here and you're good to go.
And you can do it. So like if you have too much to go and you're like, well, it's a small chopper, you just do it in batches, right, Emily? You just put a couple of, again, it's just planning. It's the time that you would, you know, take, you know, so you're just going to take a little bit of time to do that. We did have another quick question about the shrimp. So if you have an allergy, could you use like scallops or a different type of seafood, lobster, crab?
Oh, wow. Yes, 100%. Lobster, crab, I'm on board. The scallops you can use as well. They'll create a little bit more of a creamier texture when you think of the density of the scallops, but they'll be lovely. What you could do is actually get away with using bay scallops and not having to break them down as much because they are so small that you could probably just get away with cooking them and then using them in the stuffing as is. So that would be a great substitution. So for sure, and let's say you have a mix of them, you can mix them together. We're really only looking for, this is barely a cup and a half of stuffing, of filling that we're going to use in the roast. So if you think about that, if you have even some canned crab, for example, or something like that, that you want to stir in, you definitely can do that for sure.
Awesome. All right, let's go. Looks good.
So this is our filling so far. I added our parsley, just to recap, our parsley, our Parmesan, and a little bit of salt and pepper into this mixture. And I'm just going to stir in some finely diced red pepper. Again, I love that red and green, but I also like the texture of the red pepper here. It's not cooked, and it will steam a little bit as it's in the roast. So you want that kind of finer dice of the pepper just so that it cooks through as well. Okay, so you're just going to stir that in, and I'm not going to dirty another bowl. I'm just doing it right in the food processor. Okay, don't want to do too many dishes at the end of this. All right, so my filling is done. So I'm going to just set that up front here, and I'm going to bring back my roast. Now, before I go further, I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to turn my oven on to 450 degrees. And if you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's really high, it is high, but you need that because we are going to oven sear this roast. And if you have yet to try oven searing, I want you to try it this weekend, tonight if you want, with any roast. It's a classic process that Canada Beef has worked very hard on, and it works beautiful every time. I have not had a roast fail because of this method. So it starts at 450 degrees, and we're going to roast it, oven sear it for 15 minutes, and then we're going to turn it right down to 275. And I know you're thinking 275, really? Totally, 100%. And it cooks the beef beautifully every time. Okay, so that's the method we're using today. So definitely have your oven preheated. So that's what I did because I didn't do it earlier. So it needs to be at 450. All right, the next thing, you want to have some kitchen string cut. So we're going to be tying this roast. So I like to have everything kind of in front of me because once I start doing this, my hands will be in the shrimp and the roast. You know, the phone will ring, ignore the phone, but just make sure you have everything at the ready so it's easier to deal with. So because we're doing about 2-inch intervals to tie this roast, I have about 3 pieces of string that I'm hoping are long enough to tie around the roast. Okay, so those are ready to go. And I also have the remainder of that Montreal steak spice that I'm going to put on the outside of the roast. And one last thing, we need the roasting pan. So have that handy, which I'm going to put here so that I can put the roast in. So there's a couple ways to prepare your roasting pan. You can use a full roasting pan like this one with a rack. You could also use a small baking sheet with a rack in it. And what the rack does, it just lifts up the roast a little bit so that that air circulation moves around nicely and you get a really nice texture around the roast. And then any pan juices that come off the roast will be in the pan for us to use later. Okay, all right, let's get this in there. So I'm going to try not to be too messy here, but then there's no fun in the kitchen if there is not a mess. Well, that's not true, not all the time. All right, so I'm going to put this all over. And when you're putting this together, you'll notice that there is a nice, delicate kind of soft texture to the filling so that you can actually press it into the roast itself. Okay, there. Okay, set that aside. And then I'm going to just level this or even it out so that it kind of coats all the inside of the roast. I am going to leave one edge a little bit of space so that when I go to roll it, I have kind of room for an overlap. Try to get to the edges. It will kind of fall out a little bit as we go to roll it, but that's totally okay because we're going to just tuck it back in after. So I'm going to start on this edge and just, I'm not squeezing this, okay? And it's literally just kind of rolling on itself. Okay, just like that. And then there we go. I had a few little pieces come out, just tuck those in. And that may happen kind of as you go through. I'm going to put that seam on the bottom, like that. And then I'm going to take my string. I like to tie it up first before I sprinkle it with the remaining steak seasoning so that it doesn't go anywhere. Okay. And I'm just going to double tie it like that and space them out at fairly, yeah, it's about 2-inch intervals, but with the size of this roast. And make sure you get underneath there. I think I'm underneath there. All the way. There we go. And I'll do this last one. All right. Double tie. Okay. Now, if you want, you can kind of trim off this excess string if you'd like. Because we're roasting it for a short period of time at a high temperature, we don't really have to worry about that. And then we're reducing the heat. But by all means, you can definitely trim down those little pieces of string. Then I'm just going to take the rest of that seasoning and sprinkle it all over the roast. This actually forms a really nice crust. It's a simple way to add lots of flavor. If you're not a fan of Montreal steak spice, you could always use a coarse black peppercorn. So just, you know, a heavier grind with a little bit of kosher salt. Okay, and that will give you a really nice flavor as well. This has a few other spices in it, so it does work really nicely with the combination of the shrimp and the beef itself. So I'm rolling my roast around. You can see the filling staying in there pretty well, okay? And then I'm just gonna put this on the rack in my roasting pan and tuck these few little pieces that have come out there in there. And I'm just gonna move this and give my hands another rinse before I pop it into the oven. Okay, so that wasn't too painful, right?
That looked great, Emily. That was great. And you know what? I know most of the recipes that we do, or that we create, because we create all these recipes, you know, we try to make them, you know, really quick and, you know, easy meals and whatnot. But sometimes I think you just want a little bit more, something a little special, something where it's just not your everyday. If you're like me, you have your Monday night meal, your Tuesday night meal, your Wednesday night meal, and you're kind of going, all right, I think I need to switch it up a little bit. So I think that this is great. And it's not, I mean, it doesn't look that difficult. Again, just planning and having the right tools to help you get this. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's great. I'm just checking here. We had a couple of, oh, we had a comment, not a question. Fabulous. So, so yay, good job so far.
Well, normally I would do this with my ball gown on, but I just decided against the ball gown today. I'm kidding. I don't even own a ball gown. But what I want to point out is, I know this, it looks pretty big. So again, it's not. It's full of protein. It's lean beef. It's the shrimp in there. This will easily feed 6 to 8. You can even push it to 10. Depends on what else you're eating with it. So this is a fabulous kind of all 100% beef and shrimp dish. So surf and turf all the way. I don't think anyone that, you know, loves surf and turf would deny this. I know in my family, we're big surf and turf fans here. So when I've served this a number of times, they are very happy because it's also unique and different. Now, if you have a smaller household and you're thinking, I don't have 8 people to feed, Emily, so why should I make this? You should make this for you because you deserve it. You can actually make this, roast it, let it cool, slice it, and then tuck it away in portions. You can even put a little bit of sauce in a container beside it. We're gonna make the sauce next. But this is something that you can pull out on a Friday night and dinner's done. And you are making it for you. So it doesn't have to be, you know, something that you're making for everybody. You could have this a few times over the course of a few months, let's say, just because there doesn't have to be a reason. So it does freeze well once it's cooked and sliced, and then you just have to warm it up either in the oven or if you're a microwave fan, just like that, okay? And the key is that we're not, our fingers crossed, we're not gonna overcook this roast. So I'm gonna put this in the back because my oven isn't at 450 yet. So I'll just leave it here for the moment, and you're gonna hear that my oven go off when it reaches 450, and then I will put it in for the 15 minutes, okay? We need sauce. I'm not gonna show you the cooked one yet because I'm not making you stay here for an hour and a half either to wait for that roast to be done. I do have one that's resting so that we can move to that. But I wanna make the sauce. And I think this roast on its own, you don't really need a sauce, but it just makes it that little extra special. And one of the classic combinations is horseradish and beef. So just a little bit, it's not a lot, but it's enough to kind of just, you know, jazz it up a little. So we're gonna start off in the saucepan with a little bit of butter, okay? So we're just marrying the two together. We use that butter with the shrimp to create some of that creaminess. So now we're gonna add more creaminess and start with butter for the sauce. So what we're doing is making a white sauce, a classic sauce that's milk-based. So often you'll hear it referred to as a bechamel sauce. What changes is the amount of flour and fat that you use to the amount of liquid. We don't want this to be really, really thick and heavy. We want this to be fairly light and flowy. So we are starting off with 2 tablespoons of butter. Just as an aside for the butter, I'm using salted butter. If you have unsalted butter, that will totally work as well. Okay, so don't fear if that's what you have at home. If you wanted to, at this point, you could also, and even with the shrimp, you could use an oil if you wanted to for both of those. But again, having that lovely flavor of the butter in there is quite yummy. In goes my equal amount of all-purpose flour, okay? I'm just gonna stir that. And for those of you that, you know, wanna do a little question answer period, this is known as a roux when we do that process. And we're just gonna cook it for about 30 seconds or a minute, just to kind of cook it out. If it gets a little bit of color, that's okay, okay? But you can see it kind of bubbles up really nicely there. And then I'm gonna start to add my milk. So I'm using 2% milk in my sauce, and I'm just gradually adding it. But more importantly, it's not coming straight out of the refrigerator, okay? It was at room temperature, just like all my other ingredients. When you're doing these types of dishes, it's really nice to have, well, for two reasons. Everything's at the same temperature, but also, as I mentioned in the beginning, you know that you have everything out, okay, ready to go. So what we're gonna do is cook this so that it starts to bubble and thicken slightly, okay? So this is not the time to answer your phone. This is not the time to go find out what the dog's barking about. It's usually a delivery if it's not food, okay? And check the heat that you're using. So this, you don't want it to be kind of too high, because for those of you that have cooked with dairy before, you may know that it tends to bubble up and make a big mess. And we're not about having big messes when we're cooking these lovely dishes. So just kind of keep an eye on it as it's starting to bubble. And the other ingredients that are going to go in here is a little bit of more flat leaf parsley. So that's going to give us a little bit of color. And we're going to season it. Time to put the roast in. We're going to season it with some salt and pepper. And I'm going to measure out a tablespoon of the horseradish. Now, this is not straight horseradish. It is creamed horseradish. Okay. So the reason why I went with creamed, it's actually easier to find. In most cases, I'm just going to put the roast in here and put my 15-minute timer on. Okay. Just like that. But also because it blends into the sauce a little bit easier. Okay. So, but if all you have is regular horseradish, or if you have fresh grated horseradish that you're grating yourself, you could definitely use that in here as well. Okay. So I'm just going to make sure I keep whisking that. And I'm going to measure out a tablespoon of this lovely horseradish. And if you absolutely adore horseradish, by all means, feel free to double this. Or if you want to have an additional, spoonful of horseradish on the side, you can do it. It's actually something that works well with the shrimp and the beef. If you've ever had shrimp cocktail, for example, guess what's in the seafood sauce? Horseradish. So it works really well with both, okay? So I'm just kind of making sure I'm whisking all along the bottom here. And I'll start to see kind of bubbles around the edges that are happening, okay? And if you want to check for sure if this has thickened, it's more about the bubbling, to be honest with you, because I don't want you to have to worry about overcooking this. You can just grab a regular soup spoon, okay, and then put it in the sauce and see how it, I'll move it over here, see how it coats the sauce. What you can do is then run your finger across and see how it doesn't fill in. Your sauce is thick enough, okay? So that's how you know it's ready to go. I'm going to keep the spoon handy when I go to spoon it up. So now I can add my seasonings, which are a couple tablespoons of parsley. And again, if you change up the parsley in the roast, add the same herb here so that you get that nice marriage of flavor. A little bit of salt and pepper is going in as well. And then I'm going to add that horseradish in here as well. Just spoon that in. And that gives it a nice zip of flavor. There. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, you could serve this in a nice, in a gravy boat along with the roast, or you could have it so that you're spooning it right on the roast as you're serving it. I like to keep it in the saucepan so that it stays warm while I'm slicing the roast. So I'm going to bring the roast over. As I said, I did let it sit and tent it with foil. Okay. And I thought I'd show you both ways. So I had the roasting pan with the rack that I put our roast on, but this is the version with the small baking sheet and the rack on it as well, okay? So you want to tent it so that it has time to rest. And at the same time, it's also finishing cooking, okay? So you're going to test it with your instant read thermometer. So this is always the trick when I'm doing these, because I'd love to show it to you right out of the oven, but usually guaranteed it's never the right temperature. So I always like to have it rest so that I can slice into it. But you want an instant read thermometer. Mine is, you open it up, insert it, and you'll get a temperature right away. If you feel more comfortable using a thermometer that you leave in the roast for the whole time, you can definitely do that. For this one, because it's rolled, we want to make sure that we get right into the center, okay? So don't go all the way through to the other side, because that'll give you a misreading and you'll get a hotter temperature because it's closer to the bottom of the pan, okay? So I'll just demonstrate for you here. So you're going to kind of go into the center and then wiggle it down. You can go all the way and then you'll feel it, okay? But this one, as it's been sitting, I don't know if you can see that, but it says 135, which is perfect, okay? We're looking for 130, and then as it sits, that temperature elevates a little bit, and that means that it's ready to slice, okay? So I'm actually gonna get a different cutting board because I don't wanna miss out on all the juices of this roast. And if you take a look in my pan, as I tilt it, it's got some really nice juices that are collecting there, okay? And we can serve those juices with the roast as well. Now, if you're feeling that this sauce is a little too white, you can actually pour those juices into this sauce. It's absolutely delicious, okay? It also adds a little bit of color. So I'm gonna bring my roast over to my cutting board here. And I'm going to get my carving knife, which I can't remember if I sharpened or not, so hopefully it'll be sharp enough. And then I'm gonna cut off my strings here. Do we have any questions at all, Tracie, as I'm kind of preparing to slice
I'm
this?
just looking at this gorgeous roast. It looks so divine. And yes, don't make the mistake I did. Take the string off before you serve it. So it happens. And I do think, I'm so glad you mentioned the part about letting the roast rest. I think some people pull it out of the oven. There's so many reasons why not to do that, including flavor and the tenderness of the meat. And some people say, why did it come out so tough? Or, why doesn't my food taste as good as when, Emily made it? And it's because all these little tips and tricks kind of help you. We did have someone just ask about the string. You can't use any type of string. It must be strings suitable for cooking. And grocery stores carry it. I went to the butcher gave me string with my roast. So you can ask also your butcher to do that. We have a couple of questions. So the first one is actually about the roast before cooking. Could you make the entire roast, prep it raw, and then freeze it, and then cook it at a later time?
So what I would do is prep it, tie it, refrigerate it for up to a day, and then roast it. I just find there's nothing wrong with you freezing it. I just find that it absorbs some of the water from the freezer. So when you go to roast it, it doesn't have the same wonderful texture and flavor that you're looking for. But by putting it in the refrigerator for a day, you can even do it up to 2 days because everything inside is cooked. It will just set up a little bit nicer, and you do want to take it out and let it come to room temperature slightly before you put it in the oven. It will probably take a slightly increased amount of time to cook, but that's what your instant read thermometer is for, to make sure of that.
Okay, great. And then if we wanted to make this gluten-free, so is there a substitute that we can use instead of the flour in the sauce?
So because in the sauce, that's really the only place that we are using the gluten. But do check your herbs and spices, especially the spice rubs, because sometimes there is gluten in there. So you do want to check that ingredient list as well. What you can do with the milk sauce is actually cook butter just to get that little bit of flavor if you're still going to use that. And then heat up the milk with the flavoring. So the parsley, salt, pepper. Hold off on the horseradish still, and then just whisk together a tablespoon, about 4 teaspoons of cornstarch with a little bit more milk, and then whisk it in that way. So cornstarch could be your option there. It changes the texture slightly of the sauce, but it's still a wonderful sauce that you can then add once it's thickened. It usually only takes about a minute when it comes to cornstarch to thicken it, and then whisk in your horseradish, and it'll be absolutely delicious.
Great. And then in terms of the milk, would somebody wanted to know if they could use lactose-free milk in the sauce?
Oh, I don't see why not. I personally haven't tried it, but I've used it, not for this recipe, but I've used it in other recipes, and it works quite well as a substitute. So for sure, that would be lovely if you could do that.
And I think, and then just so you know, we're getting so many questions from people, not questions, comments from people saying that this looks so complicated. And now that they've seen you do it, they feel like they can try it. And I think that that's the great thing about this, is that it's not overly complicated. Just take some planning, having the right tools, and it looks gorgeous. Why don't we get a shot of the roast? We have people saying they're going to make it this weekend. This is great. Let us know how it comes out.
Well, it's one of those things, and I highly recommend this before kind of ousting a recipe from your repertoire, or if you see something online or in a cookbook and it inspires you, but when you look at it, it looks daunting. Try to take it apart, kind of like how we did it here today, where you look at the components and then look at them separately so that they come together. Not all recipes are written that way, because sometimes it's a space issue or just, the flow of things. So you kind of have to, what's that called? Compartmentalize in your head and take apart the recipe, so that you can see that it's actually a little bit easier. It's not always easy. Let's be honest. Sometimes you're just still going to put the recipe aside and not do it. But in this case, by taking things apart and looking at it, it becomes a little bit easier. I'm going to plate one up, Tracie, with some of the sauce. I'm just going to take a slice. And by the way, if you have leftovers of this, you can slice it a little bit thinner. I like to cut them about 1/2 inch slices when I'm serving them so that the filling stays in nicely. And it doesn't, but you saw that first slice has to be yours, because that's where like all the extra bits are, and it's a little crunchier. And I love that slice. So I always say that for myself. But the next day cold, if you slice this is great in a sandwich. Like hands down, absolutely delicious. So I'm going to just put this plate here, and then I'm going to take one of our slices right here. Okay. And then I'm going to just drizzle some of these pan juices first. So you get that nice kind of dark contrast, and that's got all the flavor from the roast in there. So we don't want to miss out on that. And then we're just going to take a spoonful of our horseradish cream sauce. Now just imagine this with, I didn't make mashed potatoes for everybody today, I'm sorry. But mashed potatoes, or even roast potatoes, some green beans. This is a wonderful meal to have for yourself or with friends. There we go. We'll go a little of a heavier spoonful of that sauce over top.
And then Emily is going to do what we all wish we could. She's going to taste it, because we can't. And you're right, we wish we could smell it. It looks amazing. And I think, Emily made a really good point. I know a lot of us cook for others, but we should cook for ourselves. And this is really something. And everyone is actually saying that you've given them confidence with all these cooking demos that we do and cook-alongs to try these recipes. And they're so happy that they're seeing these new ways of cooking, because I think that, if you're interested and you're going to continue to do this, and you don't need to cook every day, but it's really, if you can get your nutrients that you need for overall health and for bone health through food sources, this is what we're really trying to do here. So Emily, how you just was, yes, delicious.
I would like to eat more, but I think it's rude to just keep eating in front of everybody.
Well, there we go. Well, so everyone, so just so you know, to help, because this is recorded, which means it's going to be on the OC replay page in about 24 to 48 hours. So if you want to look again in how Emily butterflies the roast and how to fill it and whatnot, you definitely, that's going to be up on the Osteoporosis Canada website. And again, if that's not something you can or wish to do, just make friends with your butcher. And there you go. And we're going to announce the winner of our giveaway. So I've got the Osteoporosis Canada apron, and Emily has her new cookbook, which is awesome. Which one is it? Again, Kitchen Simple. There we go. So
It's simple.
Nancy Angus from Thunder Bay, Ontario. Yay, I'm going to send you an email and we'll get your information and we will send you so that you can cook along with us anytime. Oh, yay, she just answered. She said, wow. So that's great. We're so happy
awesome.
that you're going to get that. So want to thank everyone. Emily, thank you. Such a great shot there. Look at that gorgeous, gorgeous roast. Just going to quickly, sorry, y'all. It's always the fun part of Zoom, making sure we get the right one, because I always choose the wrong one and then all kinds of, there we go. All right. So sorry, y'all. So, all righty, there we go. So here's some tools on the website that we want you to give a try to. So we have the calcium calculator online listing some foods that we have that you can check out, figure out how much calcium you're getting from your diet. We also have a podcast. These are great. You can listen to them anytime, stream on your favorite podcast provider, or just click play on the website. It'll play right there and then. We've got the Know Your Risk quiz. If you are, you have the information on bone health and osteoporosis, that's great, but share that with somebody, friends, family, and help them know their risk. And as I said, we are going to have this, and there are many other webinars. We just had another great one last week on protein and bone health with Dr. Deborah Butt and Shelley Hagan, who's a registered dietitian. So these are all going to be on the Osteoporosis Canada replay page on osteoporosis.ca. We want to thank our webinar partner, ThinkBeef.ca. And also, as always, we want to thank Emily Richards for doing another wonderful cooking demo. All right, now we want you to stay connected because we have so many other great things coming up to end off 2021, but also coming up in 2022. So if you go to the Osteoporosis Canada website, just click subscribe at the top of the web page so that you can get information directly to your inbox. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And we just want to say until next time, thank you for joining us today. Keep cooking, stay well, and happy holidays. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye. See you.
Thanks, everyone.